Good morning, Rotarians and guests.
Good morning.
If you would please join me in welcoming a few guests with us today, and if they would please stand. We have George Snyder's lovely wife, Nora Snyder, with us today. Thank you. And we also have Tom Fleming, guest of Joe Zapatowski. Thanks for joining us, Tom. Thank you.
May I make a little comment about Bill Woolridge here. The Woolridges were our next, across the street neighbor years and years ago. And our one daughter, Barbara, was babysitting the Woolridge kids. They were traveling somewhere. And Barbara said they have a little bird, I forget the name, and never let that bird get out of the cage.
It got out.
Oh, no.
The bird got out of the cage. She came running over to me and said, "Don't catch it, Dad. It'll eat your fingers off." and so I tried to obey my daughter. I went around and I saw the bird sitting on a mantle. And I used a couple of words I will not use here, and I grabbed that bird and threw it back in the cage. And it survived. And so
That's a good story, Tom. Thank you.
All right, glad to hear about the bird surviving. We're going to talk about the gala. It's upcoming. It's going to be exciting. So, Evan, you're up. Gail, Ron.
Good morning, Rotarians.
Good morning, Evan.
Okay, if my math is right, we have 1 month until the 13th in the gala, so we're looking forward to that. Continue to ask your friends and family and colleagues if they'd like to join us because we have a good lineup of gifts. This week, Gail's going to share with us a list of amazing gifts that are going to be in the lineup. My gift of the day, though, I think it's really exciting, is a Corvette from Don Sitz down in Cuyahoga Falls. So somebody's going to drive out of that gala with a new Corvette for a month, and that's really exciting. The team of the week is Brad Nelson's Nabobs. Brought in about $4,000 this week. So thank you to everyone for your efforts, and we're right about at 30,000 in gifts and donations. So you know, the deadline is not today. The deadline is Friday. That being said, Rich, that's one of my favorite comments. That being said, if you have somebody that you've been talking with that is potentially going to give a gift, it's just taking a little bit longer, go ahead and just communicate that with us, but keep working with them and continue to bring those gifts in. So words of wisdom, Brad, I'm not going to put you on the spot today. I'm going to take two of your all-stars, Gail Royster and Ron Strobel, and they're going to share some words of wisdom with you.
Evan, one quick question on, if we have someone who's definitely going to give a gift but they're not going to actually deliver it till later, we should just submit the form.
Description and value.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Description and value would be perfect, and donor.
Yep. That would be great. Thank you. I just wanted to remind you all of who our beneficiaries are and how meaningful. Those of you who were here when we did the kickoff saw this, and we had the demonstration of that CPR machine, et cetera. So it's just a little reminder to kind of get you revved up for the last 2 days here. And Ron and I are going to share some of the more significant gifts that have been donated so far. We have a 1-week stay, this is phenomenal, in Breckenridge at a beautiful, beautiful townhouse. Ski in, ski out, meaning it's right on the slope. Absolutely gorgeous. It will sleep 9 people. It is a $7,000 value. So think of skiing friends that you might want to be sure they come to the gala in order to bid on that. We also have a 3-night stay in a Five Forks River Retreat in Pennsylvania, valued at $2,100. That cabin will sleep 8. We have a private wine tasting event that will be right here in Hudson, and that is valued at $500. Phantom of the Opera tickets, a whole bunch of different sports packages coming up. Ron?
We have, as Evan said, we have the Corvette. It'll be a convertible. It's from Don Sitz. Can't tell you the color, can't tell you exactly what year it is, but it'll be very recent. He's always given us a car that's almost new. His motto, of course, is that everyone drives a used car, so, you know, you never drive a new one because as soon as you drive it, it's used. But I would just suggest if you're interested in that, make sure that you get the limit on your credit card raised because Mr. Tobin, Tom Tobin, is already assured me that Gail's going to drive out with that. So be prepared to outbid Tom.
Well, we need to just jack it up and make Tom pay.
And of course, as I mentioned last week, we have the orthodontic package, which is over a $6,000 value. That article's been in the hub. Thanks to Jim Hackney and his persistence, we've gotten that in there. So those are a few of them.
All right, and that's Tom's wife, Gail, not this Gail.
Oh, you never know.
Yeah, right.
You can go too.
Yeah. Anyway, and don't forget that our wonderful board members and gala committee members are all donating a bottle of fine wine, so we will have the big bucket of assorted wines available, and that usually is the $500 item as well. So we're excited. We hope you are. We hope you're ordering your tickets. We need a big turnout, guys.
Yeah.
We need 300 people.
I've got one I'd like to raise the ante on that one that you're talking about, the $7,000 one.
Yeah?
I'm working on a wonderful one now. It's an overnight Sleep 6 in Steubenville.
Just burst my bubble. Go on, Phil. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, team.
You are? What? You should chauffeur. Good for the wine tasting.
Every week, as you know, we do a 3-minute Rotarian where we get to learn a little bit about one of our Rotarians. And this week, I would like to introduce Lynn Zupp.
Lynn, AKA What's Up. Never heard that one. What's up? I'm sorry.
So also, never heard that one before. What's up? Who's up? Batter's up. Time's up. Bottom's up.
Time's up? That's
We had a cat named Bottom for almost 20 years. So, yeah. Anyway, it never gets old.
love you.
Never gets old. Yeah. So the origin of that is that my husband's family, his dad's family was Hungarian and Italian, but his great-grandfather came through Ellis Island, and it was spelled CZAP, but pronounced chop, and it got changed to a U. So we learned that during the 5th grade Ellis Island project. So it happened with homework. So anyway, try to keep it to 3. Like Joe said, my name is Lynn Zupp. I was born in 1964 at Georgetown University Hospital. My parents lived in D.C. at the time, came home during the bloom of the cherry blossoms. When I was 4, moved to Ashtabula, Ohio. I don't think my parents intended on staying there. My dad grew up in Montana and did not like the cold weather, but ended up being there, and now they want to move away because all their grandkids are close. Grew up down in the harbor area of Ashtabula, and if you wonder why I am like I am, I swam in Lake Erie a whole lot when I was growing up in the 70s, probably not, Yeah. So I'm the oldest of 3. I have a younger brother and a younger sister. I spent a lot of family vacations in Montana. We used to get in the station wagon before seatbelt laws, and, drive across country. My grandparents lived there, so we went every summer. But did a lot of hiking, did some riverboat cruises on the Missouri River. Nice place to visit. Spread out compared to here, but I spent a month living in Italy when I was 11 years old because my dad's a chemical engineer, and there were several Italian engineers in Ashtabula working for a while, and I went back with one of the families and lived near Milan for a month when I was 11. And now that my kids are, older, I can't even imagine letting one of my children at 11 go live somewhere across the world. I went to parochial school. The school systems in Ashtabula when I was growing up were not anywhere near the Hudson school systems. I did have to behave while I was in school because we lived next door to the nuns that taught and were principals at my elementary school. And because of the whole 12 years of tuition, I did have to pay my own way through college. So I got my first job at McDonald's. I worked a lot of retail through high school, through college.
I was hoping that was a uniform.
Yes, that wasn't high fashion in the 70s. But first through 12th grade, I came close to fame. I was in the same class as Urban Meyer, and he was my boyfriend in 8th grade. And so my husband now says, "Oh, I bet you wish you stayed with him." But truly, my Ohio State connection was my attendance there. I went to school, got my physical therapy degree at Ohio State, graduated with about 7,600 people. You go down onto the field and get your sheet that says, "We'll mail you your diploma." We got to stand up with the whole College of Medicine. You don't get your name called. But 2 weeks after graduation, I married my high school sweetheart, who is my Italian-Hungarian husband. And we moved to Hudson about 21 years ago after living in Cleveland and Stowe, Cuyahoga Falls. Raised our children there in that house where we still are. My daughter Emily is a second-year student at Walsh University. She's in a global problem-solving scholars group studying education and intervention specialist. And my son is a chef in Savannah, Georgia. He went to school in Charlotte and now recently moved to Savannah, and he is in the food industry. This is also part of our family. That's our golden retriever, Riley. She is not anywhere near the golden retrievers we saw here for canine companions. She is not very well trained. She was a rescue. She's a good girl, though. She is. So I got my doctorate in physical therapy because when I graduated a long time ago, a doctorate was not required to practice. So I went back. I didn't have to, but I wanted to. Got my doctorate in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania at Chatham University. That was a lot of long weekends going to Pittsburgh, but unbeknownst to me, my family, every time I'd leave, would go to the grocery store and get Pop-Tarts and chocolate cereal and white bread, things that I didn't allow in the house, and polish them all off over the weekend, put the evidence in the trash, and so found out later that they were junking it out while I was gone. So, yeah, so they had a year of unhealthy living while I was getting my degree. Let's see. There. I work at Hudson Physical Therapy. I've been there for several years. I've worked in this area for several years. I have a lot of people who I see regularly. They consider me their physical therapist. And instead of saying, if your back hurts, try physical therapy, they say, I'm going to go see my physical therapist. Lynn's up, and they know where I am. I have been very active in my professional association doing leadership. I go to many of our advocacy days in Washington and in Columbus to advocate for patient access to care. It's getting harder and harder to get good health care these days. No one wants to pay for it. And I've done some research, which brings me to my Hudson Rotary connection. I've known Liz Ramsey for, I met her when I was pregnant with my daughter, so it's been 21 years that we've known each other, and she invited me to Rotary, and I've enjoyed being here and meeting everyone and participating in all of the service projects that we do.
Thank you, Lynn. Okay, you always learn something new when we do these. Today's Fine Day, and what? It's Ed Sogan.
Or is it Ed Sogan?
Those strings hanging out of those shorts.
Just
Here comes George.
built for speed, buddy. Just back from Florida, as most of you know, I did find a sponsor for golfing, and the Smoke Fish Company, and we'll be happy to provide you with culinary delights at your leisure. Couple things. I mentioned to Lynn that, if we could have our assistants there, Allison's there, and John, if you could stand. Pins and badges. If you do not have yours, please raise your hand and pay $1. I'm a little out of practice. I know Joe Boisel did a great job in my absence in regards to Fine Day. He's not here, so he'll be tagged the next time. A couple things. We're going to kind of bounce around a little bit and trying to hurry up since Lynn's 3-minute Rotarian was only 10 minutes. I told her $5 per extra minute, so Lynn, $2 for that extra time that you had there. A couple things that came up. Ron Strobel, if you've gone down or tried to go down Owen Brown, he is really had it with Phil Tobin in his 1947 Cadillac speeding down Owen Brown. Ron bought old used backhoe
and has parked it at Morris Road and Owen Brown and has permanently closed the street. So Phil, where you at?
Right over here. Right over here.
$2 for speeding and $1 for Ron for blocking the street for the rest of the duration. Brad Nelson. Brad, while I was gone, stole my gala ticket sale to Debbie and Bill Curran. I confronted him, as again I would, and he in his snotty way said, "You snooze, you lose." He said that to the fine master. $2, big fella. You just lost $2. How about that Masters tournament? How many people watched that thing? Unbelievable. Ernie Els, how many putts on that first hole? 6. 6 putts. And Jordan Spieth, who's not too bad in regards to the talent, 2 in the water, and then the third one was into the sand there. What was that, the 14th or 15th hole? And he 12th, and he ended up losing the tournament. But makes you feel good when you are a golfer like myself to be able to watch the pros do that type of thing. Speaking of Joe Avella, I got to get it over here. Saw a little report on Joe. He was walking down the street when he was accosted by a homeless individual a couple weeks ago. The guy asked him for a couple bucks for dinner. And Joe is, again, he's very sympathetic and everything else. He pulled out a $20 bill. And he said, "I'll give you this money, but you're not going to buy adult beverages with this $20, are you?" And the guy said, No. I gave up drinking years ago. He said, "Will you spend that $20 on a golf course instead?" He said, "No, I haven't played golf in 30 years. He said, "Well, I'm not going to give you that money. Instead, I'm going to take you home, and I'm going to have you take a shower, and I'm going to have my wife Carol cook you a beautiful, full meal." The homeless man was astounded. He said, "Won't your wife be furious for having you do that?" Joe said, "No, that's okay. The important thing for her is to see that what a man looks like after he has given up drinking and golf." Leaning over, Donna Kastner was talking about her class reunion, and she said, quote, I just kind of jotted it down and said, "Why is it at class reunions you feel younger than everybody else looks?" I don't know. It's one of those things. Oh, gala. Let's have, Brad, have your team stand up. Let's have a nice round of applause for Brad's team. Outstanding job. John, $2 from everybody that's standing because they're making everybody else look bad. Comment from our table. Bill Woldridge, who's, again, a bacon king, had 14 pieces of bacon over there, and Dan stole one. So, Dan, you owe $1 for stealing the bacon. But the other thing that Bill said, he said he's reached the age when happy hour is a good nap. So, we've got a little political contest now. Again, we've got politics going on. I know this is not a political organization, but this side of the room is going to play this side of the room in Whose Quote Is It? Okay, it's a brand new part of our Fine Day, and we're going to ask you a quote, and then this side is going to go first. If you guess the correct number, or in the quote's originator or author, they get to pay $1. If you miss it, you all pay $1. All right? Same thing's going to happen over here. So first question is going to them. You have to remain quiet. Here's a political quote. "Politicians are the same all over. When they see the light at the end of the tunnel, they go out and buy some more tunnel." Who said that? Ellie? Nikita Khrushchev. Everybody over here pay $1. I'll tell you, look at this. A scholarship winner. Let's hear it for Ellie. Woo! Okay, we got a side over here. Everybody get your dollar out over on this side.
I don't like her now.
Here's the next quote. "When I was a boy, I was told that anyone could become president." Now remember, think about it in this term. This is from years ago, but think about it now. "When I was a boy, I was told that anyone could become president. I'm beginning to believe it." Who said that?
George Bush.
Ellie? Clarence Darrow. Unbelievable. Everybody got a dollar out over here. Ellie is maybe the smartest person at Hudson High School. She's unbelievable. Speaking of golf, Tom Page was golfing in a tournament last fall. It was over at Silver Springs, or Silver Lake, and he ended up not having a very good round. He couldn't drive, he couldn't chip, he couldn't putt. He was really frustrated. He got to the 18th green, and he turned to his caddy and said, "Kid, you've got to be the worst caddy in the world." That's pretty cold. The young man replied, "Sir, that would be too much of a coincidence." Tom, $2 for being mean to your caddy. That's $2. Another golf story here. Evan, where's Evan? There you are. Evan was golfing a couple weeks ago around Easter time. The weather was great, wasn't it? Did you get out? Yeah, you did. Okay, he was on a golf course, and it was a difficult course, and he ended up at a par 3. It was a 220-yard par 3 with about 180 yards to cover the lake that was right in front of the hole. From up above came a voice. It said, "Hit the brand new white Titleist Pro V1." Ooh. He got the sleeve out of the bag, brand new Titleist Pro V1, and most of you that are golfers know that's a terrific ball. He put it up on the tee, stepped back, took a couple of practice swings. The voice came back on. He said, "Never mind, hit the range ball." $2. We have Rotary anniversaries. James Field, we have 2 outstanding, again, members that have their anniversaries. James Field, 2011, $2. Roseanne Drake, 2013, $2 for you. You guys have done a great job as Rotarians, and thanks for contributing. And the last thing I have is there's an announcement. Many of you have read this in the paper and saw it on the national news. It's a little bit frightening, but there are beautiful female aliens that are invading Earth. They're kidnapping sexy, good-looking men who are great golfers. You personally are not in danger. I just wanted to say goodbye.
Thank you, Ed. Okay, let's move into our program. George Snyder, please.
Wow, what an act to follow. Good job, Ed. Good morning, Rotarians and guests. Good morning. By way of full disclosure, our speaker today, Tom Flatting, is Vice President of Hennis Communications in Cleveland, where he works next door to my wife. Hennis is one of a handful of U.S. public relations firms specializing in crisis communications and reputation management. The firm counsels clients around the world who are on trial in the court of public opinion for matters ranging from employee misbehavior to environmental pollution. And before crossing to the dark side, Tom spent 33 years in newspaper newsrooms, holding lead editorial positions at the Detroit Free Press, the St. Paul Pioneer Press, Akron Beacon Journal, and most recently the Cleveland Plain Dealer, where he served as managing editor. He is also vice president of the Cleveland Press Club. Tom is a native of Canton and is a resident of Hudson. His wife Jeanette oversees communications for Our Lady of the Elms in Akron, while his daughter Kaylee works in marketing and communications in Chicago. Breaking the mold, his son Jim is a college student who will enter the U.S. Marine Corps. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a warm Rotary welcome to Tom Flatting.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me out today. We're in the midst of a news revolution. And sometimes when you're in the middle of this kind of change, I think sometimes you don't step back, you don't stop, you don't think about how much has changed and how rapidly. The big change hasn't really been in newspapers or magazines. The big change has been readers and how they get news. And an equally big change has been how advertisers reach people to sell stuff. Those changes have in turn changed profoundly how news gatherers, reporters gather and give you that news. Today I want to talk to you about how this has happened and why it's happened. And why, I will argue, a lot of the complaints you hear today about news coverage are very reminiscent of the late 1800s and early 1900s, and why I think that's a reason for hope that news coverage is going to get better. We're going to start with numbers, because I want you to understand how we got from the America of just 15 or so years ago to the America we live in today in terms of communications. It won't just be a recitation of numbers, I promise, but at the end I hope you'll understand better how we got to this place and why. The big thing, of course, is the move to digital, the move to online news. In 2012, for the first time, more Americans got news online than they got news from radios and newspapers combined, according to a Pew study. And, of course, the loser has been print. In 2000, 50% of people said they had read a newspaper the day before. By 2012, just 12 years later, that was down to 23% saying they had read a newspaper the day before. For readership, it's actually been a mixed bag in terms of the number of readers of newspapers and what newspapers produce. There's obviously been a big decline of print. Newspaper print circulation has plummeted. When I got to Detroit, to the Free Press in 1994, we sold about 1.2 million papers every Sunday. We were the 5th largest newspaper in America. Now it's around 450,000. 450,000 people buying your product in a contained geographic area is still nothing to sneeze at, but it's half what it was, less than half what it was. And that's a pretty common measure around the country. It's true in Cleveland. It's true at the other newspapers I worked at. Print circulation has dropped by half on average since 2005. Newspaper readership online and news readership online at the same time has exploded. The Plain Dealer, for example, has more readers than it has ever had. When you combine who is reading online with who is still reading in print, on average, 5 million unique visitors a month come to cleveland.com. Now, that's a mixed bag. For the business of publishing news, there's no mixed bag. It's been a disaster. Revenue from ads, from advertising, traditionally represented about 70 to 80% of newspaper revenue, and the rest was made up in sales, the subscriptions you paid for, the newspapers you bought, single copy newspapers. But about 80% was advertising. In 2000, newspaper ad revenue was $50 billion across the country. 2016, just 16 years later, it's projected to be $12 billion. It's down 76%, and it's continuing to drop. That's why you've seen smaller newspapers. If Walmart's main source of revenue dropped 76% in 15 years, you think you'd see smaller stores and fewer stores? Of course you would. Actually, newspapers held out for quite a while in the early 2000s. They didn't actually cut their space. They were smaller because there were literally less ads. Those pages with the ads were gone, but there was more news than ever. Nobody realized it. Newspaper to ad ratio is the amount of news versus the amount of ads. Traditionally, Knight Ridder, where I worked for many of those years, had about a 60-40 split, 60% news versus 40% advertising. The Plain Dealer, Gannett, some of the other big chains were 50-50. That's now, on Mondays, it's about 90-10, 95-5, 95% news, 5% advertising. On Sundays, which is still the biggest day, it doesn't approach 50-50. So that's why newspapers have had to start cutting space. That's why you've seen the end of 7-day home delivery in Cleveland, Detroit, New Orleans, Portland, Oregon, and other cities. And there are fewer newspapers. 35 years ago, there were more than 1,700 newspapers. Now there's fewer than 1,300. There were 60,000 newspaper journalists at those 1,700 newspapers. As of 2013, there are 36,000 journalists, and there are fewer now. The layoffs have continued in 14, 15, and 16. From 2003 to 2012 alone, loss of 16,200 full-time newspaper newsroom jobs. Magazines, 38,000 jobs have been eliminated in that same period. Meanwhile, though, Digital news operations that didn't exist have risen up. Politico, ProPublica, Bleacher Report, Vox, Vice, Barstool, all these have been founded. Those are national. There have also been successful local online news operations. There's an online newspaper called MinPost. It's in the Twin Cities. It's now 8 years old, doing very well. It's modeled on a national public radio revenue model, where MinPost gets members. They've expanded. They're starting to win journalism awards. So it has not been a complete decline, but the declines have been severe for newspapers and magazines. So you go back to the mid-1990s when I was in Detroit, and newsrooms were starting to wake up and recognize what was going on with online. We're starting to recognize there were readers. You get to 2000, and there was this rush to build and improve websites, to learn how to write headlines that work online. There was a panic to learn search engine optimization. Search engine optimization is basically, in its most basic form, it's how you take a story, and if people are searching for that story subject, your story is one of the first to show up on Google. It can mean thousands more readers. And, you know, there was some success. Newspapers were actually succeeding at that. And just when they started around 2000, 2002, 2004, just when they started to feel like they were getting a feel for this online journalism thing, this hit. And mobile became dominant. Last year, for the first time, more than half the people who were reading Cleveland.com stories were reading them on smartphones. More than half. So now we're seeing a rush to figure out what people are reading on their phones and how they're doing that. Think about that, by the way. 5 million unique users a month. More than half are reading just on this. It changes the experience, and it changes how the news gatherers and the news presenters have to present the news. So we also learned that smartphone owners are 2.5 times as likely to get news through social media as those without smartphones. Social media like Facebook, like Twitter, like Instagram. And the patterns are similar for tablets like iPads. So we all tried to figure out how to use these, and then social media hit. 4 in 10 people now say they get their news last week from platforms like Twitter or Facebook. If you're under age 30, it's 7 in 10. So for people under age 30, the main news supplier right now is Facebook and Twitter. Now, they don't produce any news. They don't create any news. It's just links to other stories. Younger people are 3 times more likely to discover news through social media than adults age 60 and older. That's not really a surprise. Similarly, people under 40 are more likely than those 40 and over to discover news through internet searches and online news aggregators. Roughly 2/3, 64% of adults are now using Facebook, and half of those users get their news there, amounting to 30% of the general population. Those were people who used to buy and read newspapers over coffee in the morning. Now they get their news on Facebook standing in the grocery line. The power of sharing also comes up through Facebook. The #1 driver now, I can tell you again because I was there as recently as July, the #1 driver of news, of readers to Cleveland.com is Facebook. If someone posts a story on Facebook, it gets on average 10 to 12 times as many readers as a story not posted on Facebook. And that goes back to a very basic human instinct. In the late 1990s, Northwestern University did a great readership study, still the best readership study I've ever seen. And what it found was that the main driver of causing someone to read a story is if someone else tells you about it. Well, that's what Facebook does. And rather than me telling you about it over coffee in the morning or at the water fountain at work, it's telling thousands of people about it. So all this has fundamentally changed how people read. Here's the first line is the dirty little secret of newspapers that existed for years and that we didn't like to tell people, so we didn't tell them. Newspaper readers on average spent 12 to 15 minutes with each day's edition. It takes, and I can tell you this absolutely because I used to time myself reading the newspaper when I was a managing editor. I read every word and I would time myself because it was how I could tell whether we were cutting the amount of news in the paper. It still takes, even if it's in its currently thinner state, it still takes on average about 40 minutes to read the Plain Dealer cover to cover during the weekday and 3 hours on Sunday. But people were only spending on average 12 to 15 minutes. Online readers spend 4.5 minutes per visit. 4.5 minutes. And if you come to a story from search, from Google search, or Yahoo, or other search, or some other search engine, or Facebook, those readers spend about 1.5 minutes. If you want to ask yourself why news online sites are doing more lists, more pictures, more slideshows, more short stories, that's why. All right? This has also fundamentally changed how journalists are reporting and writing. And it has given rise to a technique that you've probably never heard of called iterative reporting. Iterative reporting is catching fire in newsrooms across the country, and readers, for the most part, don't know about it, and journalists don't really talk about it. It's one of those revolutionary changes that just kind of happens. Under an iterative reporting model, you write it as you learn it. As I was raised in newsrooms, I was screamed at thousands of times probably by editors, and I screamed at reporters, "You don't have the story yet." We held stories for days. One of the basic ethics of journalism was you don't have the story until you've done your level best to get everybody involved in the story to talk to you, particularly people who have a crucial role. And we held stories. I put journalists on planes to chase people. We left business cards indoors. We sent certified letters. In Detroit, basically, the rule was you had to show me that you had reached out to a key source 6 times before I would let you say that someone had no comment. And people ran. They hid. They didn't want to talk to us. And we still pursued them. That is gone. Under an iterative reporting model, when you have the basic facts of the story, there are still a lot of journalists that are trying to do it the right way, and they don't want to get it wrong. But when you have the basic facts of the story right, if you haven't chosen to talk to me, tough. Your loss. And if I haven't had time to talk to you, tough. Your loss. Because the story's going, and your voice won't be in it. And then we'll just build on the story. We'll update it. The ethic is that we'll update it online, so you actually see the story build over time, because you're only reading a couple of paragraphs of it anyway. And so there's not one big story, there's lots of little stories. In its best, highest use, iterative reporting is fine. Readers see it, they comment, you get ideas, they send you questions, you build on that, you build the next story. But it's not always in its highest, best use, as the old journalism wasn't either. So, is it better or worse? Is journalism better or worse for all this? And the answer is yes. It's better because there's more direct contact with readers. When I first started in the business at the Beaver Creek Daily News outside of Dayton in 1982, I might hear from, well, actually in Beaver Creek I probably heard from more people, but for the most part you would hear from readers maybe once a week, maybe once a month. Maybe they'd give you a call, maybe they'd stop you on the street. There's constant contact now with readers. You've seen the comment boards. That contact isn't always pleasant. But there's email. There's much more access. When I was a managing editor, I talked to readers every day. Readers are participating in the process. They're telling us directly what they want, telling journalists directly what they want. You have immediate reporting and citizen journalism. And that helped lead to things like the coverage of the Arab Spring, Ukraine and Russia, the shooting in Jefferson, Missouri of Michael Brown. All that benefited, I would argue, from instant journalism and citizen journalism. On the other hand, journalists have a much better sense of what people are reading. We knew that people were only spending 12 to 15 minutes on average with the paper. We had no idea what they were reading. You know, once you bought it, you know, people used to say, well, I lined my bird cage with it. And I used to say, great, you bought it. Do whatever you want with it. This also gives you powerful reporting tools. And there are many more outlets. And barriers to publishing are virtually gone. So for example, y'all are familiar with the Flint, Michigan water crisis? the best reporting on the Flint, Michigan water crisis. Really, the guy who broke the story is named Kurt Guyette. He's a veteran reporter who was working for the Michigan branch of the ACLU. And he got a Ford Foundation grant to cover the story, and then he got his stories published in outlets like Alternative Media and The Nation. That would not have happened in the pre-internet era. In Copley, Ohio, right up the road, a 15-year-old did blog posts on the Tumblr social networking site. She called them the last message. She asked people for the last messages they received by text or on Facebook or on Twitter from loved ones right before they died, right before a divorce, right before a car crash. And then she listed them and wrote about them. It went viral. They got millions of readers online. That 15-year-old girl now has 2 book deals. That would not have happened in the pre-internet era. But, there's always a but, the editor's but. It's not better for these reasons. There's been a loss of local journalists. Those 36,000 jobs lost, or the 36,000 journalists remain, and the 16,000 jobs lost. The 16,000 jobs lost are the reporters who were covering your city hall, your zoning board, your local high school football team. In a lot of cities, in a lot of areas, those reporters are gone. There's been a real loss and de-emphasis of editing. In Detroit, we also talked about each story was touched at least 6 times after it was written. There was a line editor. The line editor had a boss. There were at least 2 copy editors. There was a copy desk chief who looked at it, and if the story was sensitive enough, the managing editor or the editor looked at it. Many stories, the majority, now go online without being edited. That's why there are typos. That's why there are more mistakes being made. And lazy journalism. You know, I talked about iterative reporting. Part of the fallacy of iterative reporting is that getting people to talk to you who don't want to talk to you and actually might hate you really isn't a pleasant experience. So under the iterative reporting model, you avoid the unpleasantness. I got the facts, I'm going. And it gets worse. There's an emphasis on celebrity news. There are scare headlines, often about minor news designed to lure a reader in. Lots of pictures, less news. Lots of crime news, a lot of blood. If it bleeds, it leads. There's sensational treatment of serious news. There's unquestioning reporting on pseudoscience. How many of y'all would agree that these are common and valid criticisms of journalism today? That's exactly what they said about journalism in the late 1800s. That's why I lifted the quote. That was the yellow journalism era. It was born in the mid-1890s to early 1900s. And look at the parallels. Paper suddenly got cheap. Presses suddenly got cheap. The barriers to entry to newspapers and journalism came way down, and people rushed in. Newspapers were popping up everywhere. Cleveland had 4. New York had 15 in the city. Now, there is virtually no cost to being a publisher. That 15-year-old in Copley is a publisher. Then, Joe Pulitzer, of the Pulitzer Prize, dropped the price of his New York World paper to 2 cents per issue so that he could win a circulation war against William Randolph Hearst. Now, news is free on the internet. This were some of the famous excesses of yellow journalism. This was Joe Pulitzer's newspaper, the New York World. This is coverage of the Maine explosion. There are historians who would argue that Joe Pulitzer and William Randolph Hearst helped trigger the Spanish-American War. So let's go back to Joe Pulitzer. Joe Pulitzer, pretty spectacular, pretty sensational. He got nothing on William Randolph Hearst. If you didn't get that William Randolph Hearst was offering you a $50,000 reward for who blew up the Maine, he put it 4 times on the front page, just in case you missed it the first time. Hearst was famous for saying, war is good for circulation. At the same time, and is that all that different than this? At the same time, though, because journalism always works this way, there's always good and bad, there were a lot of positives. There was increased international reporting during the yellow journalism era, including by Hearst Pulitzer and others. There were exposures. They exposed living conditions of immigrants. There were watchdog stories that chased corrupt politicians like Boss Tweed out of office. This is my favorite example that I just stumbled across. So, along with doing pretty shoddy reporting on the Spanish-American War, Hearst's paper did some great reporting on the slum conditions in New York, including an expose on the toll that was taken on children during a New York heat wave. But this was the headline on that paper: "How Babies Are Baked." That headline would absolutely, you could absolutely imagine that headline today. But what happened is this. Newspapers like the New York Times stepped in. A man named Adolf Ox Sulzberger bought the New York Times. He decided, and he noticed, that readers were starting to get tired of the yellow journalism. Even with their successes, readers were starting to turn away. So he decided, and the New York Times at that point was bankrupt. It was going out of business. He decided he was going to do it a little differently. He was going to emphasize subscriptions, newspapers delivered to your home over single copy. He de-emphasized headlines. He de-emphasized art. He emphasized more reporting and more reporting on more diverse subjects, and it worked. Readers went to it. And so other newspapers followed. And the point of all that, and so then that led to what some call the golden age of journalism. By the way, in my experience now, the golden age is whenever you were doing it. But the golden age of journalism did include the civil rights reporting of the 1950s, the Vietnam War reporting of the 60s, and of course the Watergate era in the 70s that got a whole generation of young people like me interested in journalism. So I believe that we could be on the verge of a new golden age. With everything I've told you about what's wrong with journalism, there's a lot going on that's right. What you're seeing is collaboration for the sake of journalism. Outlets that never work together. You're seeing newspapers embrace the power of multimedia and video, and you're seeing all these new journalism outlets. I pulled 3 days ago, the Investigative Reporters and Editors, an organization called IRE, issued its annual awards. To me, they're more important than the Pulitzers. They are really the stories that made a difference this year. I want to give you some idea of who is now winning the IRE awards. That used to be dominated by the Knight Ridder papers and the Washington Post and the New York Times. An investigation of how states have dismantled worker comp programs took first place in Investigative. That was done by a collaboration between ProPublica, a 3 or 4 year old news online site, and National Public Radio. They would have never collaborated in the previous era. Investigation of mental illness and crime finished second. That was a collaboration between the Tampa Bay Times and the Sarasota Herald Tribune, two newspapers that were rivals and again would never have collaborated. The beneficiary of that is readers. Multimedia. The Associated Press took the first overall prize in the IRE Awards for a package called Seafood from Slaves. There were traditional stories, but there was also video, audio, interactive digital tools like databases. It was wonderfully told. Online, it was a joy to read, and it resulted in freedom for 2,000 slaves. An investigation of police shootings in Georgia was a collaboration between WSB-TV and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. They are owned by the same company, Cox, which was founded in Ohio, but it doesn't matter. TV and newspapers never used to collaborate like this on serious journalism. And there's been a rise in news. Vice News was created in December 2013. Last year, their work on the CIA and CIA torture won an IRE award. Is anyone familiar with BuzzFeed? So BuzzFeed is a site that mostly has been dedicated to cat videos and lists and silliness. BuzzFeed 2 years ago hired a guy named Mark Schoaf, one of the best investigative journalists in the country, and told him to go out and form an investigative team. This year, BuzzFeed won 2 IRE awards. Why is this happening? I believe it's happening for the same reason that it happened in the early 1900s, because people are demanding it, because readers are getting tired of the excesses of the second yellow journalism era online. And you are starting to see a rise. Now, there are big differences. The yellow journalism, the original yellow journalism era, occurred in a time of expansion. This is occurring in a time when traditional media, newspapers and TV stations, are not expanding. So that is a big difference. But there is still hope, and the hope is with you, and the hope is with your kids and with your grandkids. I mean, look, newspapers, all news media, but particularly newspapers, have always been Willie Sutton. Why did Willie Sutton rob banks? It's where the money was. Why did newspapers do what they do? They go to where the readers are. And then they serve the readers' demands. If the next generation of readers only wants cat videos, that's what they're going to get. But I don't believe that to be true. I don't believe that to be true. I think they want, serious journalism still sells. It still sells online. And I think over time what you're going to see, and it will be more rapid than occurred in the previous era because everything happens more rapidly today, I think you will actually see an evolution of journalism back to what you and I would consider more serious. But that's up to all of you. That's my shtick.
Thank you.
I would be happy to answer any questions. Let me tell you what I didn't do, and George had a great idea. He said, work something in, one of the things that really interests people is Donald Trump and this issue of earned media, free media. How does that fit? And God, George, I tried to fit it in, and I tried to do a Boss Tweed comparison, and it just doesn't work. But I did find this about Trump, which I found to be interesting. There has been a lot of criticism of media for kind of handing over the store to Trump and giving him, he doesn't have to buy campaign ads because he gets so much coverage. I will, two things about that. One, I'll give you the Willie Sutton argument again. Media covers him because people read about him. And second, if he wasn't getting all this media coverage, traditional media coverage, I'm not sure it would matter. This is why. Donald Trump has 6.4 million Facebook followers, 6.9 million Twitter followers, and 1.2 million Instagram followers. He doesn't need the media to reach people. And those people that have gone to those social media sites, they're making those choices on their own. That's not some newspaper deciding to cover him, and then you have to read it. Since January 1st, as of mid-March, Trump had 866% more engagement on Facebook than the rest of the GOP candidates combined. Since January 1st, as of mid-March, Trump had 866% more engagement. Engagement means people have liked your story, liked your post, commented on it, or shared it. 866% more engagement than all the other candidates combined. If you want to know why the media covers Trump, that's why. What questions can I try to answer?
Can you answer questions later?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Appreciate it. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Tom. And due to time constraints, Tom will be here for a few minutes. If you have any questions, you go up and see him. So don't forget, there's a board meeting following our meeting today. The Ladies Royal Rotary Tea is this Saturday. And thanks to all of our greeters and our setup crew. And our Rotabook drawing today is $14 to the winner and $282 jackpot. We'll let Nora draw the winning ticket, and that lucky ticket is 2828. 2828. Oh, it's close to me. Who is it? 2828. Dick Pearsall. There's your 14. Okay, thank you. And your jackpot.
No.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.